How you doing, everybody? Welcome back to Before I Forget. This is my video channel inspired by my Instagram channel, 1985 Road Dog. Haven't been on in a while. I really haven't had much to say. You can talk about the glam metal scene or the rock scene or whatever till it's like, how many times can you talk about it? I mean, stories, there's always stories. But, what inspired me to get on here today as I watched this new documentary, Nothing But a Good Time, based off of the book. Of course, any book is much more in-depth. The film or the movie or the documentary just touches on a lot of what's in the book because there's just, a lot of information in the book. But here are my thoughts on that. I thought it was, the stories have been told a million times. This documentary really is centered off of the Sunset Strip Hollywood scene. It's called, whatever it is. It's, Nothing But a Good Time, story of hair metal. Most of the bands in this documentary aren't what I consider hair metal. But it was pretty accurate with the timeline of things. Post Van Halen, that kind of thing, leading into Motley Crue and Rat. The timeline was good. When Motley Crue really started nationally getting known with Shout at the Devil, I wouldn't call them a hair metal band. I mean, the term hair metal didn't even exist in that era. No one was called a hair metal band. Motley Crue in 1983, Shout at the Devil, was a heavy metal band. That's what they were. They weren't glam. They weren't a hair metal. That term, like I said, didn't even exist. So, I don't consider Motley Crue a hair metal band. They got lumped in like anything else, with any scene, whether it's new wave or punk in the earliest punk days, the Talking Heads were called, punk. They're the furthest thing from a punk band. What they were was a band doing things that were different and unique and outside the norm of top 40 radio and, REO Speedwagon kind of stuff. They were doing something different and they just got lumped into the punk scene, but they weren't punk. Motley Crue wasn't a hair metal band. I don't consider Rat a hair metal band. Rat in their first foray, once they signed to Atlantic Records, Rat, I remember reading a press release, Rat were called fashion rock because they didn't want to be heavy, which Stephen Piercy in the documentary talks about. They didn't want to be like Motley. They wanted chicks at their shows. So they dressed a little bit, more fashion forward and their hairstyles and things like that. They got a lot of girls, whereas Motley were getting all the dudes because it was, heavy metal, dark imagery. To me, the first hair metal band was probably Poison. Poison, the way they looked on that first album, Look What the Cat Dragged In, on the cover, they look like chicks. So that was the beginning to me of hair metal. And everything post-Poison started, even in the Poison days, the term hair metal didn't exist. Hair metal didn't exist as a term. I don't even know when it started, but it definitely wasn't in the 80s. No one was a hair metal band. You were either a heavy metal band or a glam band. Poison leaned more glam. Changed the game in a way, the way they approached their whole show and everything. They were light and fun. They had a lot of chicks. They were good-looking guys. They had some good songs. Most of the bands in this documentary are not what I consider hair metal. If you notice in this documentary, there's no new interviews with Motley Crue because they don't want to be considered hair metal. There's no new interviews with anybody from Guns N' Roses except Steven Adler. But none of the other GNR guys wanted to be in this documentary, probably. I don't know for sure why they weren't in there. But to me, they don't want to be in a documentary whose subtitle is, History of Hair Metal or whatever. So they didn't want to be in it. it's very West Coast take on the scene. I mean, granted, a lot of the bands, most of the bands came from Hollywood and that scene out there. To me, well, let me go backwards. Poison was not the original hair metal band to me. To me, the original hair metal band was Bon Jovi. That was the beginning of that. And again, he wasn't called hair metal in 1984, 83, whatever the first album came out. Slippery When Wet, what was that, 86, 87? He wasn't called hair metal. There was no term hair metal, but he had the hair. And that was talked about a lot. You know, Bon Jovi's hair was talked about a lot. Probably more than any other band at the time. But Bon Jovi's not even in this documentary. Again, he probably didn't want to be considered hair metal. You know, some of it, I'm like, there could have been so much other stuff put in. Do we really need to hear from certain people? Do they really matter? One guy that I thought was really good, actually, he was in there a lot, is the dude from Slipknot. I can't remember his name. I was never a thrash or Slipknot kind of fan. Couldn't even tell you one of their songs. I know they were popular and they were big at a point, but he was very good. He's also said that he was sober, so you can tell the way the guy presented everything and how he spoke about things that he was sober, which is interesting. Alan Niven, the manager of Guns N' Roses and Great White, is in it quite a bit, and he's great. He tells it like it is, and Alan Niven was like a tough English guy that, he says in this documentary, no one died on his watch. He was a good manager in that sense. He knew how to manage a band like Guns N' Roses. And Great White, I mean, they talk about Great White a lot, and they're crazy, Jack Russell getting arrested and all this kind of stuff, going to jail. And again, Great White, not a hair metal band. Extreme, not hair metal. Trickster, not hair. None of these bands are hair metal. I mean, there's very few bands I consider hair metal, and Poison is one of them. Bon Jovi's one of them. And then the post wave, the late '80s, the Warrants and the Firehouses and the South Gangs and those bands were hair metal because they followed a formula which became the hair metal formula of sound, presentation, look, video direction, costuming. It became cookie cutter, and that's when it became hair metal. Warrant's a hair metal band. Firehouse is a hair metal band. Interesting. Extreme is in this documentary. Definitely not a hair metal band. I don't consider Trickster a hair metal band. Trickster were closer to the Partridge Family than they were to hair metal. So I don't know. It's a very West Coast take on it. It's not really the definitive history. Where was Twisted Sister? Twisted Sister in '84 were huge. Biggest videos, hair out to here. Again, I know Twisted Sister from the club days in the late '70s in New York. Definitely not a hair metal band, but by '84 with Stay Hungry, and the look and the costumes and Dee's hair kept getting bigger and bigger. Twisted Sister should have been in this documentary as a hair metal band, but I bet you they didn't want to be included and they didn't want to be called hair metal. I could be wrong there. But where was Twisted Sister? They're not even in it. It's like, so it's very West Coast. It's very influenced by, Ricky Rockman and Cat House and Tough and Metal Sludge Guy. What's his name? Stevie Rachel. Actually, he was pretty good in it. He was very honest. I thought he was good in what he said. Honest about his band, honest about everything. I liked him in this. And I'm not a fan of this guy. He was supposed to help me out with my book, and he never did. I don't know what happened. He just disappeared and dropped the ball. Somebody probably put a word in his ear not to help me for some reason. Who knows? You got to remember, back in the older days, in the 80s and the 90s, I was wild, out of control, and, a lot of people didn't like me for whatever reason, because I was abrasive. I'm going on 2.5 years, no alcohol. Haven't done cocaine since 1988. Yeah, so I'm much more sober. I live in the desert in the Southwest, no one around. I live a very sedate life, and when you're in a sedate life and you don't have a lot of stimulation and a lot of people and a lot of civilization around, you go within and you think about your past. And I talk about some of this in my book. You think about your past and what you did and what you were like, and that's a version of me that doesn't exist anymore. I'm not saying it didn't happen, and I'm not saying people didn't have their reasons for liking me or disliking me or whatever. But that was then. That was so long ago. I'm a different person now. There's a saying, so many people know a version of you that doesn't exist anymore, which is very true. But that version of me, the 80s and the 90s, I was like a steamroller. So, whatever reason, Stevie didn't help me with the metal sludge with my book. He said he was gonna. We had a good conversation about it, and he just disappeared. I don't know. But put it this way: his band was not that big. I mean, they barely made a dent. But his fame is more from Metal Sludge, the website. So that's probably why he was included. It's a Hollywood-based thing. It's the guy from Jackass that directed the movie, put it together. Steve-O's in it, the Jackass guy. But, he's in it from Metal Sludge. He couldn't be in it because of Tough. If he never did Metal Sludge, Tough would not have been in that documentary. So that's why he was in there, which is great. I understand. I mean, I've done 20 questions on Metal Sludge 100 years ago. I got nothing against Metal Sludge or Stevie. I just wish he would have been honest with me and told me why he didn't want to help me with my book. Anyway, Ricky Rockman's a whole nother thing. They had the Cat House. Most people I know in the business didn't like Ricky Rockman. He was an asshole. That's why. He was an ass to a lot of people. Put it this way, he would never have been on Headbangers Ball if Axl didn't get him the job, and he didn't have his tongue up Axl's butt. So, whatever. I got nothing against that guy either. From the first time I met him, I wasn't crazy about him. So he's in this documentary, and he's, talks. He's actually pretty intelligent and says, makes good points. He was there for a lot of it at the Cat House and all that stuff. I just never liked the guy. So all of the direction of this documentary, it's a 3-part documentary on Paramount. It goes, from a Hollywood point of view. At the very end, they mentioned Skid Row. Again, not a hair metal band. Skid Row were a heavy metal, they were a unique band. They were a heavy metal band. They really wanted to be heavy. Once Nirvana and all that came in, Skid Row wanted to be, heavy. But prior to that, with, I Remember You and all those songs, they were like pop metal. But live, they kicked ass. So they had a good, hardcore following of metal people. But they had to hit songs for the girls. Skid Row comes in at the end, again, not heavy metal. But again, I was there through all of this. I was born in 1960. So, my concert years started in the, early 70s. So I saw all of this develop. I saw it all change and develop in style and sound and look and the advent of MTV. And I went through the punk scene. I saw the Sex Pistols in Atlanta, Georgia in 1978. I was a teenager. I've been through a lot musically and gone on a crazy musical journey, but I was there through all this hair metal, glam, whatever you want to call it. Wasp is in the documentary. Wasp was a very important band in that scene and the timeline, but they weren't hair metal. Wasp was the furthest thing from hair metal. They were heavy, rip your face off. They weren't hair metal. It was okay. I mean, but all this stuff is like, you've seen it and heard it 1,000 times. Very surprised with Tracy Guns. Tracy was really good. I know Tracy. I work for Tracy. I haven't spoken to him in a long time. And he was really good. he had some good points to make. Tracy, again, Tracy was there from the beginning days. And I could tell Tracy's matured a lot and grown up. I mean, Tracy used to put his foot in his mouth a lot back in the day. Said some stuff that was just not cool, or did things that weren't cool. But he seems like he's really matured, Tracy. I was very, very surprised with what he had to say in there, his segments. Kelly Nichols and Steve Riley are in there for a short bit. Steve, God bless him, it was good to see him. He didn't look good in the doc, but he told some funny wasp stories. And Kelly made a great comment about Mike Monroe, the singer of Hanoi Rocks. They touch on Hanoi Rocks, how Hanoi Rocks influenced Guns N' Roses, which they did tremendously. Kelly was a huge Hanoi Rocks fan in the early days prior to LA Guns and the Sweet Pain days and everything. He was a big Hanoi Rocks fan. So he talks about, Michael Monroe was so incredible. Talk about disappearing in a room. If you're standing near Michael Monroe, you just fade away. And I can't remember the exact words he used, but it was pretty spot on. Hanoi Rocks didn't influence the scene. Hanoi Rocks influenced Guns N' Roses. Only Guns N' Roses could take what Hanoi Rocks had and take it further. They were the only band, because Guns N' Roses wasn't hair metal. They weren't heavy metal. They were a dirty rock band. And with the style and a look and a vibe that no one else had or could replicate. This is the early Guns N' Roses now. This is with Steven Adler. This isn't the later 90s Guns N' Roses when they were playing stadiums and showing up 4 hours late and all that. I'm talking about Guns N' Roses 86, 87, 88 in there. They were untouchable, and they were the true heirs of Hanoi Rocks. Not as glammy, but they took that street urchin gypsy thing and took it further. Hanoi Rocks was important in the scene to Guns N' Roses. No one else really cared or knew or, fringe stuff. But it wasn't like, overnight people started looking like Hanoi Rocks. Only Guns N' Roses picked up elements of their vibe and look and sound. No Faster Pussycat in this documentary. I guess they didn't want to be called the hair band. I don't know why they're not in it. Ricky Rockman and Tammy are tight, and I don't know why Faster Pussycat wasn't in there. Where was that? Where were they? Not in it. Strange. Again, not a huge band, Faster Pussycat. I don't know. Did they ever have a gold album? I don't know. They had that one big hit, the ballad House of Pain. But I don't know. Did they ever have a gold record? I'm not really sure. Surprising, though, they weren't in the scene. Tammy was in Faster Pussycat, of course, but he also was tight with Ricky and the Cat House and all that stuff. So I don't know. Why were they not in there? Strange. Yeah, I mean, it's like, it was okay. But like, I really, I just thought there could have been so much more to it. Doc McGee, who managed Motley, Bon Jovi, Skid Row, now Kiss was the last band he worked with. Doc McGee's in it a lot, and he's great because Doc's, he's a regular guy. I've in the 80s, I've had, time to be around Doc McGee, and he was, I don't want to say he was a street guy, but Doc McGee knew the street. And any manager worth his weight in anything in those days had to have some street knowledge, how to get out of crazy situations. Doc's really good in this. I love Doc McGee. He was in the Motley days, 83, 84, 85 in there. I had some encounters with Doc that were just hilarious. Yeah, I mean, it's okay. I watched it last night and I'm like, it gives me something to talk about on here. Again, in those days, I was right in the middle of it all. So I saw it all happen. I saw the grunge thing come in. And the grunge thing, they pretty much hit on it right. Nirvana and Pearl Jam, Soundgarden were not really. Soundgarden weren't big on the radio right away. Pearl Jam and Nirvana were big on the radio immediately. Soundgarden came later with Black Hole Sun. And there you have it with that. But, in those days, I was working at Limelight, DJing at Limelight in Manhattan. Saw the change go from the LA Guns and the Guns N' Roses and those bands through to Pearl Jam and Rage Against the Machine and White Zombie. Saw that scene change like that. Sure, the bands, the hair metal bands were still around and still playing, but it was just within a year it all just disappeared. Stevie from Tough talks about that when his video came out, and then Nirvana was out at the same time and all that. Same thing. LA Guns had come off of Hollywood Vampires and things were going down and they were playing clubs again, and they played Limelight. And the next week after LA Guns played, Pearl Jam played, and they were on the way up. And it was an insane show, the Pearl Jam show at Limelight. I have a video on my channel here that I talk about that, the Pearl Jam show at Limelight. But anyway, that's my take on this documentary. I really don't have a lot more to say about metal and glam. And it's like, I could tell stories for days, but it's like, who wants to just hear endless stories about drugs and groupies and jail? And it's just like, you could talk about that crap forever because it was an everyday occurrence in those days. But I try not to talk bad about the scene or people or bands. I wasn't a fan of a lot of that stuff musically. I was never a Poison fan, for example, but I give them all the credit in the world for doing what they did and getting where they got. I mean, they worked hard and they had a vision and they stuck to it. So I wasn't a fan of a lot of that stuff. Certain people in the business, that rubbed me the wrong way. If it was the 80s or the 90s, I might have, done something crazy and who knows what to these people. Violence or whatever. That was then, man. Now I just forgive and forget and let everything go. The past that's another lifetime for me. Doesn't exist anymore. But it is what it is. Certain people have written the history of the scene, and forever it will be. Me, I have my own book, Tales from the Gutter and Other Rock and Roll Shenanigans. It's on Amazon, globally, hardcover, softcover, Kindle. Check out my Instagram channel, 1985 Road Dog, for lots of pictures of those days in the 80s and the 70s and the 90s, rock bands and craziness. And I appreciate you watching this, and thanks again. Sorry it's taken me so long to get back on and do a video, but appreciate it. Speak to you soon. Be well. Ciao.